about time and website design. To give you an overview of what this lightning talk covers, we're going to start with the constraints of website design using objective time, and then psychological time and how that might impact your website design, and then we'll get into tolerance management a little bit. And I should probably ask how much time I have. Okay. All right. Well, so we'll see. If you can tap your watch if I'm running too long. Just to be clear, I preface this, I didn't do the research on the psychological background. I took most of this from a series of articles called Why Performance Matters, and I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Smashing Magazine. It's a German website design magazine online. And so they have very interesting articles if you are interested in user experience for your websites. And so Dennis Mishinov, if I can, I will publish these slides later and you can get the direct links to the articles. So here's a hypothetical question. Which site do you think is better? So these are stats that were taken using webpagetest.org yesterday. So these are screenshots of 2 news sites. And you can see that one takes about 12 seconds to fully load, and one takes 22 seconds to fully load. And we'll come back to this, but I just want to ask you to think about it. Which site would you think is the better one? A few definitions, first of all. One is objective time. Objective time is your clock time. So that's the standard definition for our time. Then psychological time would be the opposite of that. Psychological time is how we perceive time. And as I'm sure most of you know, our psychological time can vary quite a lot depending on a number of factors. So Calvin here is looking at the clock because he only has a certain amount of time to finish his book report, and he's still only halfway through his book. So for him, time might be moving way too fast, whereas if we are Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. Waiting to get out of work for the weekend to begin, it might be moving very slowly. In terms of communication, we have human-to-computer style or human-to-human style. The human-to-human style is typical where we don't see much delay when we're talking to another person in a conversation. And then we have human-to-computer style, which is typically a little bit slower. You might see some delays. And if you've seen Zootopia, one of my favorite scenes was when the sloth at the DMV was extremely slow in processing any request. That sloth is acting more on a human-to-computer scale than what we are normally used to. Performance optimization is improving the improvement process for improving your delivery speeds or your response speeds, depending on from the moment that you engage an event to when a user expects the event to have received a response. Performance budget is how much time you allow to perform. So the time that you're allowing to complete a process. All right, now we move into time is money. Every second impacts the bottom line. Here's some statistics that have been results of research studies. One is that a visitor will abandon a website after 3 seconds. That's not very long. Walmart did a study and found that for every second of improvement for their website, they increased their conversions by 2%. And that might not seem like a lot, but when you're talking on a scale of billions of dollars, that becomes fairly significant. Another website called Auto Anything found that if they halved their loading times, they increased their sales by 13%. So the bottom line here is that our attention spans are short and time is of the essence. When you are going to design your web page, the general rule of thumb is your website should load in 2 seconds. And that has lately, like within the past few years, based on the creators of the Blink rendering engine used by Chrome, they suggested that it should actually be 1 second. So let's go back to the websites that we were discussing earlier. Okay, anyway. This first site that takes 12 seconds to fully load, this is a quite popular website. It had 84 million unique views in the month of April, which is the most recent stats for it I could find. And that's for Fox News. Then for the 22-second loading time, 104 million users. So this site may not be better than Fox, but certainly it has more viewers. And that's the CNN.com website. So you can see that that even though there is a guideline that you should have your website loading in 2 seconds or 1 second, very popular websites do not abide by that. So let's talk about that a little bit. First of all, in time of psychological time intervals, when you're talking about short times, they've broken this down into 4 important durations. The first one is instant. That's in 0.1 to 0.2 seconds. This is when you experience no delay in the response. As the user, you perceive no delay. The immediate, half a second to a second, is when you experience the delay, but it's barely noticeable. So this is what we experience when we are conversing. This is human-to-human interaction. When you're conversing with somebody else, you might have a very noticeable delay, or you might have the noticeable delay of a second with the response, but we're so used to it that we're very comfortable with it. So it might be noticeable, but who cares? Then there is the user flow duration. So 2 to 5 seconds is the amount of time that we experience intense concentration. Sorry. Okay, there we go. 2 to 5 seconds is our, what they say is intense concentration. Now, obviously, some of us can get absorbed in our work and for half an hour or an hour, and so that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about specifically here is for the average task that most users face when they're on a website, their intense concentration lasts for a maximum of 5 seconds. The 2 seconds, by the way, this is where we got the standard page load time guideline of 2 seconds, is because, you know, if a user has intense concentration for a minimum of 2 seconds, then you want to catch their attention while they're still focused. Then the attention span, our attention spans range in the range of 5 to 10 seconds. And this is where you're still focused, but you are easily distracted. And this number is gradually declining. So it was at 12 seconds in 2010, or in 2000, and then it was at 8.25 seconds in 2015. So we are getting shorter and shorter, but they are, you know, the typical suggestion there, or I guess the average is, we say 10 seconds is how long your attention span will hold. So when you're choosing a performance budget, obviously what the Blink creators, when they were looking at what they wanted their rendering times to be, is they wanted where you have immediate loads but instantaneous feedback. So that's where they get their 1 second load recommendation. When you are choosing your own performance budget, you have to consider, is 1 second reasonable? So I'm going to postulate that it's not very reasonable. Even Google, if you do their the test for the loading of the Google website, and you know that's just like a logo and a search bar, that averages 3 to 4 seconds. So probably not reasonable to load your page in 1 second. And then you have to ask, is 1 second necessary? So when you are talking about your own performance, you're probably going to be comparing it to sites of equal services. So there's this idea that when you're optimizing your performance, you can chase the leader. So you can look at your competitors' load times and try to match that. Psychologists have identified a concept called a difference threshold. That's the threshold at which we would actually notice a difference. And so in terms of time, they've kind of noticed that there is a 20% rule happening, which means that the minimum change for times of short durations in which somebody would notice the difference is 20%. So if you have a 5-second loading time, 20% of that is 1 second, right? So if you improve the performance of your web page by half a second, nobody's going to notice. Alternately, if you decrease the performance by half a second, also nobody will notice. So you have a little bit of leeway both sides there. So if you are comparing your website to somebody else's, just consider that rule. If it takes theirs 10 seconds to load, then you probably have an extra 2 seconds there to kind of play with. Also, keep in mind that performance is just one factor that would be considered when somebody is weighing the usefulness of your website. So other factors that they might consider is their need for your service, the reliability of your website, the usability of it, just how beautiful it looks or doesn't look. So there are additional factors to consider when you are working on the performance of your website. Time neutralization is where the time difference is noticeable, but does not impact user preference simply because there are other factors at play that are being encouraged there. However, it is important. So in addition to talking about objective time and how that would impact your website, there is also another consideration to keep in mind, and that's the psychological time. So the first principle of psychological time is that every event, we differentiate different events based on where we can determine a start and an end. So each event will have a start and an end marker. Concept number 2 is this idea of active waiting versus passive waiting. An active wait is where you still have mental processes happening while something is happening. So for example, if you are trying to work out a puzzle, there's no appearance of anything happening, but your mind is going through certain steps to kind of try to figure out the puzzle. Or in this example with the biker, if you are riding a bike, you might not have a destination in mind. It might not seem like anything is really happening, but you're using your brain. So that's considered an active wait. On the other hand, there is the passive wait, and the passive wait is usually marked by the fact that we have no control over that. So if you are waiting for somebody to come to meet you for something, like if you're waiting for your date to arrive, or if you are standing in a queue where you don't have any control over how long that wait is going to take, it's a passive wait. So typically when we are thinking about wait times, we are actually considering the passive wait time, where that's what people get angry about. We don't want to wait for anybody else, basically. Have done studies and found that if you're in a passive waiting situation, you are going to overestimate how long the wait time is by 36%. So that just shows you that it's quite important to reduce that passive wait. So the conclusion from this is when we think about wait time as being, or passive wait as being the bad wait, the conclusion you might draw is that we need to reduce that passive wait. So we're going to take the passive wait and then kind of replace it with some active wait times. And you can do that at the beginning of the wait time, so that's the preemptive start, or you can do it at the end, which is an early conclusion. Okay, so one example of a preemptive start. So we'll start first by talking about Disneyland, the place where all your dreams come true. They kind of recognize this. I don't know how many of you have been to Disneyland, but they recognize that this preemptive start is important. And so like when you are standing in a 2-hour line for that ride and desperate to get on the ride, they actually have screens that show, they'll show cartoons or, have somebody introducing you to the ride that you're about to go on. So they're taking out some of that passive, grumbly wait time and replacing it with something to engage you. And you're also going to see this in websites. So these are 2 screenshots of Safari iOS. And when you search for something, it's actually, Safari is loading that top hit in the background. So they're trying to reduce the amount of time you'll have to wait after you click on that top hit. They're assuming that you're going to click on that top hit. Also, another way that they do this is that you'll notice on your iPhone that when you bring up a link, it will switch to a new window. And just the act of showing the switch to the new tab, it has your mind focused on something else other than the wait. So that starts the wait process in the background as well. And some ideas for you when you are working on your own website, there is a resource hints W3C specification. So this is in working draft status right now, but they have some tags that you can put on your links, your HTML links, that tell the browser to start loading particular sites in the background. So this is still in working draft status, which means that not all of the browsers support all of these functions yet, but when the DNS prefetch is probably the most supported if you look on the whatcaniuse.com. So that's most supported for modern browsers. And what you can do with that is that it looks up the domain name. So if you have a site that redirects, then you might want to append that rel equals DNS prefetch on your links. Or if it's a link at the bottom of your web page that is going to be one that somebody wants to click, then that's another one to use that. Now, talking about early completion, one example of this is your video streaming sites where they won't load the entire video that you're going to take a look at. Instead, they will just load enough of a chunk to make it, where you can start playing it and it can download the rest of it in the background with a seamless user experience. When you are designing your own web pages, what you might want to do is use JavaScript to insert parts of the page that don't matter. So, for example, one commonly used space is your footer, where you can leave the footer out of the original HTML and then inject that later on, so that the onload part of the web page loads without having to wait for that additional data. And so this is an example. This screenshot shows how Amazon, which has like a 7 or 8 second load time, how they will actually load a fair bit of the content in that first second. And so that becomes then an active wait while everything downloads in the background. You can start shopping without having to wait for everything. Now, there are going to be cases when you have met the limits of how much of the psychological time and how much of the objective time that you can really relegate with your coding. So one final note is to talk about tolerance management, and that the reason for this is that so not only do people not like to wait as far as passive waiting, they get more upset about waiting if they're uncertain how long that wait is going to be known, or how long that wait is going to be, and also if there's an unexplained wait. And if they don't understand why there's a wait, then that can also make people angry. So that's when like when you have progress bars, those progress bars are there for a reason. And you can have a couple of different kinds of progress bars. You have your dynamic ones, which will show the progress. Either a determinate time, like if they know it's for sure not going to take more than a minute, you can show just how far along you are in that process. Or an indeterminate one just says, all right, this is how many files that we have to scan. So you just have to wait, but you know that there are 1,250 files to scan. Alternatively, there's the static kind where you know for a fact just how many gigabytes that you have to download, or if you just have like the repeating icon. So you can also combine progress indicators. This is probably not going to show because the animation is not going to work through the website. But anyway, you probably recognize this one. This is Slack's. Slack will have a loading bar when it's loading all of the threads from your forum. And that one will also show, in addition to showing the progress, it will also show like a little positive message saying, have a good day or something like that. So that's another way that you can initiate that active wait response, because when people are paying attention to the messaging and thinking, oh, okay, yeah, I'll have a great day, then they're less thinking about how long it's taking to load that website. So in conclusion, your audience's time is important. It's especially important to you because it may affect your bottom line. And if you don't acknowledge how important their time is, then you might lose your audience. So we've covered a few different approaches to reducing the time that users will have to wait for your website, including just reducing the objective time it takes, adjusting it, managing their patients with psychological factors using active wait times, and then also managing their wait time with tolerance management. Any questions? Yes, Erin. Yes, so actually I wanted to mention that. You'll notice on this particular graphic that there are two different page load times. So one of them is, there's probably a better way to do this. Let me just, okay, maybe not. Oh, here it was. Okay, so this one has two different load times. The one on the very left-hand side, so you can see that actually the second one, even though it's 22 seconds to fully load, it loads in 12.12 seconds. So what that first number is actually, it's the time between when you press enter in your address bar and then when the Windows load completes. So it's when the window loads. And then in the background, your web page will still be doing other stuff. So that second one, the 22 seconds, is actually the 2 seconds after there's no more network activity. So there's like a 2-minute lapse in network activity because usually there's JavaScript requests happening or some other requests that are trying to get additional parts of that web page. So you can see that there's only 2 seconds between the top one, 9.6 seconds and 11.6 seconds. And that's because Fox News loads everything when you click on the address bar, click enter. Whereas CNN really takes advantage of this active wait time where they are, even though the page loads at 12 seconds, they're doing a whole bunch more in the background to load additional parts. So yeah. Anything else? Okay, great. Thanks. Who's next?